Summer, 1858. The heart of the British Empire, the Palace of Westminster, is under siege. But the enemy isn't an army. It's a smell. A stench so profound, so gut-wrenching, it's rewriting laws in real time. Inside the House of Commons, curtains are soaked in chloride of lime, a crude chemical barrier against the invisible invasion. But it's useless. The air is a thick, brown poison rolling off the River Thames, a bloated corpse of a river carrying the waste of 2.5 million people. Members of Parliament, the most powerful men in the world, gag mid-speech, holding perfumed handkerchiefs to their faces. They are trapped. The city is choking on its own success, and the angel of death, cholera, is sharpening its scythe for the hot months ahead. In the chamber, one man stands apart from the panicked politicians. His name is Joseph Bazalgette, chief engineer. He's not a lord, not a statesman. He's a plumber on an epic scale. And in his hands are the plans for the most audacious construction project the world has ever seen. A weapon, not of war, but of salvation. He has a plan to tame a monster. But first, he has to convince a parliament on the verge of fleeing for their lives to sign the biggest check in the nation's history. The clock is ticking. The river is rising. And London is about to learn that the greatest threat to an empire can come from within. To understand the weapon Bazalgette planned to unleash, you have to understand the power source. A ghost in a machine. A captive cloud that was already changing the world, steam. Our story begins over a century earlier, deep underground, where a different kind of drowning was taking place. 1712, Tipton, near Dudley Castle. The rhythm of this world is the clang of a pickaxe and the slow, terrifying seep of water into a coal pit. For miners, it's a death sentence. For the mine owners, it's a financial disaster. Then comes a man named Thomas Newcomen. He's an ironmonger, not a scientist. He builds a monster of iron and wood, a groaning, wheezing beast that breathes steam. His atmospheric engine is brutally inefficient. A huge cylinder, a piston sealed with leather, a violent spray of cold water. But it does one thing no man or horse could do. It lifts. It sucks water from the earth, allowing miners to dig deeper for the black rock that is beginning to fuel a revolution. For the first time, humanity has disciplined steam. But it was a clumsy beast. The real genius, the man who would teach steam its manners, was a Scottish instrument maker named James Watt. In 1769, while repairing a Newcomen engine, Watt has a flash of insight that will change everything. He realizes the engine wastes immense energy by cooling and reheating the same cylinder. His solution? A separate condenser. It sounds simple, but it was a leap as profound as any in science. It quadrupled the engine's efficiency. Watt, with his partner, the shrewd industrialist Matthew Boulton, didn't just sell engines, they sold power itself. But Watt was cautious. He feared high-pressure steam, calling it a dangerous devil he wanted no part of. And he protected his invention fiercely. His patents, extended by Parliament until 1800, were used like legal artillery, suing rivals like Hornblower into submission. This created a strange bottleneck. For decades, while Watt's safe, low-pressure engines pumped water and turned mills, the true, explosive potential of steam was held in check by a wall of parchment and lawsuits. Was it a quest for safety? Or a stranglehold of monopoly? The answer is, both. The moment Watt's patent expired, the devil was let out of the bag. Men like Richard Trevithick, a rough-and-tumble Cornish engineer, began experimenting with high-pressure steam. Around 1801, he put a high-pressure boiler on wheels. It was crude, it was dangerous, a bad rivet could turn the machine into a bomb. But it moved. Steam was no longer chained to a mine or a factory. It was learning to walk. This untamed power needed to be forged, to be given immense strength and delicate control. That came in 1839, when James Naismith dreamt of a hammer. Not just any hammer, but a steam-powered titan whose blow could be controlled so precisely it could tap the top of a pocket watch without breaking it, then rise and fall with enough force to smash a ship's propeller shaft into shape. The steam hammer married brute force to an artist's touch. It made possible the giant iron plates and rails that would build the modern world. Steam had learned to strike. This new, disciplined power was quickly conscripted into the art of war. In 1855, the British Army was freezing and starving to death in the mud outside Sevastopol during the Crimean War. Their supply lines, dependent on horses and ox carts, had dissolved into a quagmire. It was a logistical nightmare. The solution arrived on ships, rails, sleepers, and locomotives. In a matter of weeks, civilian contractors laid a thin iron vein from the port of Balaclava to the siege lines. The Grand Crimean Central Railway. Suddenly, the yoke was taken off the oxen. Locomotives hauled hundreds of tons of ammunition, food, and warm coats to the front. The siege tightened like a noose. For the first time in history, a war was won not by a general, but by an engineer. 7 years later, on the other side of the Atlantic, steam would render 1,000 years of naval tradition obsolete in a single afternoon. March 9, 1862. Hampton Roads, Virginia. Two bizarre vessels circle each other on the gray water. The CSS Virginia, a lumbering iron fortress built on the burned hull of the USS Merrimack, faces the USS Monitor, a strange, floating cheesebox on a raft, with a revolutionary rotating gun turret. It was the first battle between ironclad warships. Cannonballs that would have torn a wooden ship to splinters simply bounced off their iron hides. For hours, they hammered each other to a deafening stalemate. But the verdict was clear. The age of sail, of wooden ships and men, was over. The future of naval warfare would be forged in foundries, powered by steam, and clad in iron made possible by Naismith's hammer. Steam had learned to fight. But this immense power, unleashed on city streets, came with a brutal learning curve. September 15, 1830. The grand opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. It's a national celebration, a festival of progress. William Huskisson, a member of Parliament and a champion of the railways, steps down from his carriage to speak with the Duke of Wellington. He doesn't hear the whistle of Stephenson's rocket approaching on the parallel track at nearly 30 miles per hour. In a horrifying instant of confusion, politics met velocity. Progress claimed its first high-profile victim. The country learned a hard lesson: a captive cloud moves with an unforgiving logic of its own. And all this time, while steam was conquering battlefields and revolutionizing transport, a silent, more insidious war was being waged in the streets of London. The city had grown too fast. Its ancient systems were collapsing. 100,000 cesspits lay beneath the homes of the rich and poor alike, unlined pits of human waste that leached into the soil and the water supply. In 1854, a doctor named John Snow did something revolutionary. During a brutal cholera outbreak in Soho, he didn't look at the air. He looked at the water. He mapped the deaths and traced them all back to a single water pump on Broad Street. He convinced the local authorities to remove the pump handle, and the outbreak stopped. It was a landmark discovery. Cholera wasn't carried by a mysterious miasma or bad air. It was in the water. But the scientific establishment and Parliament hesitated. They clung to their old theories. And then came the summer of 1858. The Great Stink. A relentless heatwave baked the city, and the Thames, already thick with effluent, began to ferment under the sun. The smell was a physical presence. A journalist described it as a mixture of a graveyard and a sewer. The river itself was a horror show, bubbling with methane, coated with a greasy scum, its banks littered with the swollen carcasses of animals. This was the crisis that finally broke the political paralysis. The stench did what years of scientific evidence could not. It made the problem undeniable, inescapable. It reached into the halls of power and grabbed the nation's leaders by the throat. And into this moment of crisis steps Joseph Bazalgette. For years, he had been planning. For years, his designs had been debated, delayed, and dismissed as too expensive, too radical. Now, his time had come. On the floor of the stinking Parliament, he unrolls his masterpiece. A plan of breathtaking scale and genius. He wouldn't just replace the old sewers. He would build an entirely new circulatory system for the city. 82 miles of massive, brick-lined intercepting sewers, running parallel to the Thames. These weren't pipes. These were subterranean rivers, large enough in places for a train to run through. They were designed to catch the city's waste before it ever touched the river, channeling it eastward, far beyond the city, to be released on the outgoing tide. The genius was in the details. Bazalgette specified Portland cement, a new, waterproof material, to ensure the tunnels wouldn't leak. He designed them to be egg-shaped. Why? Because that shape increases the velocity of the water at low flow, making the sewers self-cleansing. And most importantly, he calculated the required fall at 2 feet per mile. Then, legend has it, he took that calculation and simply said, well, we're only going to do this once, and there's always the unforeseen. So he doubled it. That single act of foresight is why his system still functions for a city many times the size he designed it for. But there was a problem. East London was flat. Gravity wasn't enough. Here, Bazalgette would borrow the quiet artillery of the Industrial Revolution. He would use steam. He designed 4 colossal pumping stations at key points. Crossness and Abbey Mills were the crown jewels. These weren't just functional buildings, they were cathedrals of iron. Inside, giant beam engines, some of the largest ever built, would stand like gods in a temple. Named after members of the royal family, these engines would lift millions of gallons of sewage every day, raising it up so gravity could take over again. It was a declaration: the machine was the new cathedral, and its purpose was to deliver salvation from filth. The bill authorizing this monumental project was rushed through Parliament in just 18 days. The Great Stink had forced their hand. What followed was a decade of construction that dwarfed any project before it. 318 million bricks. 880,000 cubic yards of concrete. An army of thousands of navies digging through the London clay, facing cave-ins, explosions of pocket S, and deadly sewer gas. It was a war fought in darkness, a battle of brick and iron against chaos and disease. But as the system came online, section by section, the results were immediate. The Thames began to breathe again. And the cholera epidemics that had terrorized the city for decades vanished. Bazalgette had done more than clean a river. He had saved a city from itself. But there is always a cost. There's always a reversal. The path of progress is never clean. Think of the lives lost. William Huskisson, crushed under the wheels of progress. The thousands of nameless navies buried in tunnel collapses. The boiler explosions that ripped through factories and steamboats, a constant, bloody reminder that this new power was always straining against its chains. In America, hundreds of steamboat explosions on western rivers led to the first ever federal safety regulations imposed on private industry in 1838. In England, after a catastrophic boiler explosion in a Massachusetts shoe factory in 1905, engineers finally came together to write a unified code, a constitution for boiler construction, to tame the dragon. A new priesthood of inspectors and insurers arose, their holy books filled with calculations for gauge and pressure, turning catastrophe into a predictable premium. This is the pattern. This is the lesson burned into history by steam and steel. In every age, power arrives like a wild animal. Raw, dangerous, and unruly. And survival, our survival, depends entirely on our ability to build the cages. The valves, the governors, the patents, the inspection codes, the budgets, the laws. These are the invisible infrastructures of safety that allow us to harness innovation without being destroyed by it. Parliament, gagging on the stench of its own failure, finally understood this. They signed the check for Bazalgette because they realized the life of their city was no longer just a matter of politics and trade, but of horsepower and brickwork, of rateable value converted into siphons and culverts, of an engine's duty measured not in gallons pumped, but in funerals avoided. Listen. Can you hear the echo? Our world hums with the same captive power, just in a different form. Our data centers are the new boilers, vast pressure vessels of heat and demand, screaming for coolant, for grid capacity, for a codebook and an adjuster. Our battery patents and chip fabs are the modern version of what's legal fortress, gating progress in the name of order while nations argue over who controls the throttle. And our summers now carry their own stench, the sour smell of floodwater in the subway, the haze of wildfire smoke, the silent, oppressive heat that strains our power grids to the breaking point. Crises still write the checks. We are still learning, again and again, that power without a working safety valve will always choose explosion. The verdict is this: Bazalgette's sewer is more than a historical marvel. It's a blueprint. It teaches us that you must build the control gear, the technical, the legal, and the moral infrastructure, before the captive cloud you milk for wealth and convenience escapes and suffocates you. You build the valve before you open the throttle. Look around you. Our world is run by invisible pipes, cables, and code that we take for granted until they fail. Bazalgette never got a statue in a grand square, his monuments are hidden beneath your feet. So here's the question for the comments: if you had the power to will one piece of invisible infrastructure into existence today, a policy, a technology, a regulation, to solve a modern Great Stink, what would it be? What is the unseen crisis we are ignoring, right now? Let us know below. And if you want more deep dives into the invisible engineering that saves us from ourselves, subscribe to the archives. The investigation continues, every day.